Good afternoon and welcome back. I'm Marcus Peter, coming to you from CATS, Catholics at the Shore, this amazing conference that takes place on the Jersey Shore every year. This year, I'm blessed to be joined by Dr. Jerome Foss. He's one of the speakers. Jerome is the endowed professor of Catholic thought and culture at St. Vincent College in Latrobe, Pennsylvania. He earned his doctorate in political science at Baylor University and has published numerous books, articles, and essays. Jerome, thank you very much for being here. How are you?
Oh, I'm very good. Thank you for having me. I'm blessed to be here.
Well, I'm blessed to be able to connect with you. We are men of kindred interest and therefore kindred spirits.
Yes.
I'm an immigrant and therefore a self-embraced student of our history, and appreciatively so. Given that that's the topic of your talk, the Declaration, our 250th year, I want to give you some time to just share the crux of your talk, especially coming from a Catholic political thought perspective.
Yeah, good. Thank you, Marcus. So it's the semi-quincentennial. It's that was one word, semi-quincentennial.
That's a mouthful.
Yeah, of the Declaration of Independence. So the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. And the bishops of the United States are using this opportunity to consecrate the United States to the Sacred Heart of Jesus, which is really important and really good. In my talk, I started with a quote from John Adams. John Adams, on July 3rd, wrote Abigail, his wife, and said, "From this point forever, Americans will celebrate July 2nd as the day of independence," because it was July 2nd that they actually voted for independence, and then the Declaration followed a couple days later. So we celebrate on the 4th, obviously. I like the letter because it's fun that he got the date wrong. But the rest of the letter is really important, too, because he says that the way that Americans are going to celebrate is with solemn acts of devotion to God and with fun and games and fireworks and all of that. We get the fun and games part down. We're really good at the fireworks on the 4th of July. We're not really good as a nation at the acts of devotion to God. And that's really an important part. So I'm glad our bishops are using this 250th anniversary of the Declaration to do something that really is solemn and important, and it's a good act of thanksgiving, but it goes beyond that too. And so part of my job and my vocation is to teach people about the principles of America. And I do that as a Catholic, and I teach at a college, so I get to do that all the time. And understanding the Declaration is really important. The principles are really important. The way the Declaration is organized is very important for everybody to understand. But part of the point I made in my talk today here at Catholics at the Shore is that July 4th isn't just the day for American independence from Great Britain. It's also, for Catholics, a day to celebrate because it's the beginning point of the freedom to be Catholic in America. You could not be Catholic in America before July 4th, 1776. It was against the law under English law. So separating from England was also a separation from the Church of England and all of those English laws that prevented people from practicing the Catholic faith. And since July 4th, 1776, the Church has been growing in the United States. And so for Catholics, I think it's really important that we celebrate July 4th, both as a political liberation, but also as a religious liberation too, right? A liberation in the sense that the Church finally was able to have a legal presence in the United States.
If one is a student of history, you see very quickly that even the concept of elected government and representative government, even certain principles behind concepts like the Electoral College to ensure that there's equal say amongst the states. All of these things are heritages of a very Catholic Europe. The monastic tradition paves the way for a lot of this. And therefore, when you take a look at the founding of the United States, I say this because I know that some of the people who say these things are well-meaning, but I think even amongst Catholic theological thought, we can be very myopic to say, well, the United States founding wasn't Catholic inherently, and so the whole thing is flawed from the get-go. It's more Masonic than anything. But the reality is, for as much as there are appeals to natural law and the Christian thought, you're looking at what is inherently a Catholic heritage. I invite your thought there.
Yeah, absolutely. And the Declaration of Independence is actually a good example of that. It's an argument, right? It's built as an argument. In other words, it takes reason very seriously. And that's certainly not just Catholic. I mean, it goes back beyond Catholic, but it's something that the church has always embraced, right? That arguments matter, that when you're making a logical argument, you're participating in logos. And so there's something inherently Christian about making an argument. But even more explicitly, there's 4 references to God in the Declaration of Independence. Right? The laws of nature and nature is God, endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights. They appeal to the supreme judge of the world at the end of the document, and they have a firm reliance on divine providence. It's beautiful. Think about the first 3 references. The laws of nature and nature is God. God is conceived of here as being the author of the laws of nature. He's a legislator, endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. In English tradition, it's the executive, it's the king that endows people with rights. So this is God, the executive. And then they appeal to him as the supreme judge of the world, very obviously judicial. So the idea of the three branches of government is built right into the Declaration. But whereas humans can't be trusted to hold all 3 types of political power, God can, because God is perfect, right? He is perfect. And what we do when we govern is we try to participate in God's governance of all of creation, which he does through providence. So when they rely on divine providence, it's both a prayer that God will provide for them, but it's also a commitment on their part to be connected to and participate in God's providence. That's very Catholic, I think.
I agree 100%. So you started by quoting John Adams in his correspondence to Abigail. I've tried to make myself a real student of their correspondences outside of our founding documents, and Adams is, I believe, probably my favorite of the founding fathers, just because of how explicitly he speaks about the role of God in not just the founding of the nation, but the flourishing of the nation. So, for example, when he writes to, it was to Jefferson. Yeah, he says, it's where he said, this Constitution was founded for a religious, moral people. It's wholly unsuited to the governance of any other kind. And then you parallel that with what Washington talks about in his farewell address, that the 2 indispensable pillars are religion and morality. You start seeing very clearly that even if the Declaration does not overtly either directly quote the scriptures or overtly claim a central church as an authority, its claims are inherently Christian in nature, or at least Christian in heritage.
Yes. Absolutely. And that's something John Adams gets, and he talks about this frequently. As president, he'll call on the nation to fast and to pray. Washington does as well. I love having students read Washington's proclamation for Thanksgiving, that first proclamation. It's easier to read than the whole farewell address, but it's the same basic point. And what Washington, much like Adams and others, says, and I think Washington probably says it best, that if this is a Republican regime, a Republican constitution, then it depends on the people, and the people must be well governed themselves. They have to get self-government. They have to govern themselves. They have to be moral. And I love how Washington puts this in his farewell address. He says, don't give in to the temptation of thinking that you can have morality without religion. If you lose religion, you're going to lose morality, and then you're going to lose Republican government. And Adams was very much aware of that as well. And even the more the less Christian founders like Thomas Jefferson, I don't think is, I think he's working in the tradition of Christianity, but he's got some issues.
He's a deist.
Yeah, I mean, he thought of Jesus as just a moral teacher. But even Jefferson realizes you need to have religion if you're going to maintain morality, right? So there's this deep insight that you need to have something outside of government that's helping to shape and form your citizens. Very much a Christian idea.
My guest is Dr. Jerome Foss. He is one of the speakers here at Catholics at the Shore, and we're talking about the semi-quincentennial celebration of the anniversary of the independence of our nation, and all that entails for us as Catholics to be able to celebrate. Continuing on the other side of the break. Stay tuned. I'm Marcus Peter. Good afternoon and welcome back. I'm Marcus Peter talking with Dr. Jerome Foss, one of the speakers at Catholics at the Shore 2026. He is the endowed professor of Catholic thought and culture at St. Vincent College in Latrobe, Pennsylvania. He's also the director of the Center for Catholic Thought and Culture and the director of the St. Vincent Core Curriculum. Wow, you wear a lot of hats.
I wear a lot of hats.
Director of the SVC Honors Program. He is a prolific author. And his research is particularly in the areas of American political thought, especially from a biblical perspective, and in this case, Catholic perspective. I really appreciate lending a proper Catholic read that's virtuous and centrist. So we're not trying to err on either extreme, because and I believe you would have seen this already as a pattern, that even amongst well-meaning Catholic thinkers, we are seeing a shift of either people who are saying, well, this founding was, Masonic or Protestant or way too natural law, post-Enlightenment at best, and so there really is no Catholic fit into this. Or the other extreme, well, the founding was, and so let's be Catholic isolationists. Or the other extreme, let's be integralists about it. Let's push for a Catholic political government. I see problems with extremes, especially when we think about human governance. I invite your thoughts on the matter.
Yeah, it's important for Catholics in America, right, American Catholics, to understand their history, understand the history of the Church in this country. Catholics have always supported and embraced the founding for a lot of reasons. I mean, there's a very practical reason that it opened up the possibility of being Catholic in America, but also because there's a harmony of principles. And yes, there was cultural anti-Catholicism at the time of the founding, but that was a remnant of English customs and English mores and English laws, and people like George Washington did a lot to overcome that. And he forbade his soldiers, for example, from celebrating Guy Fawkes Day. I think as we lose touch with our history, we're more prone to become an extremist in one direction or the other, and one extreme usually invites the other extreme. So part of what we're seeing today, because we're forgetting our history, we're forgetting that Catholics have been welcome in America since the Declaration of Independence, that Catholics helped with the Revolution, that a Catholic country helped us win the Revolution, that there were Catholics who helped write the Constitution, and that Catholics have been doing more and more and more in this country, politically, artistically, in the realms of business, just across the board, right? The Catholics have had a huge presence here, which is why the bishops, Catholic bishops in America, have long thought about the founding as being even better than the people who made it thought it was, that it was more Catholic than they would have given it credit. So they built better than they knew, is how it's usually put. I think there's a lot to it, and that the founders would have been the first people to admit that, not for reasons they would have thought of as Catholic, but they knew they were participating in something that was beyond themselves, right? They were trying to align what they were doing with Providence. And so even if they didn't think of themselves as doing something Catholic, they're doing something that was very much in the tradition, the intellectual and spiritual tradition that the Church has helped shape for civilization.
I love how you mentioned that and how you round that together, because what that also proves is, you think about the Enlightenment influence that our founding fathers had. They were all students in different ways, shapes, and forms. Brilliant men who made themselves brilliant by study. They engaged the life of the mind seriously. So yes, you have Enlightenment influence, but we can also be the first to acknowledge that anything that is good in Protestantism, in the Enlightenment movement, and therefore in the founding of the United States, anything that is good can find its roots in a greater good within the Catholic doctrine, both political as well as natural. And so we can rightly therefore say all that is good that has created the avenue for Catholic flourishing here, we can attribute to a Catholic heritage.
Yes, absolutely. And there were a lot of influences that went into the founding. Christianity was one. Enlightenment thought was one, but it was a limited Enlightenment thought. So you're going to find a lot of the founders criticizing early Enlightenment thinkers who are very explicitly atheistic. And they're going to be critical of the later Enlightenment thinkers. Sort of like so Hobbes on one end, Rousseau maybe on the other.
Yes.
They reject both of those. Most of them, they all reject Hobbes. Most of them reject Rousseau. And their reading of someone like John Locke, is arguably not the best reading of Locke. They make Locke less like Hobbes than he might have actually been, right? So there's Locke, and then there's the Founder's Locke.
Yes.
And the Founder's Locke is, I think, much more amenable to that Christian tradition than the actual Locke might be. So some of the critics of America on the right today, including the integralist crowd, I think they see that there's a Lockean influence there, but their reading of Locke is not the Founder's reading of Locke. Right? Their reading of Locke might in some ways be better than the Founder's reading or more true to Locke, but it's not what they were thinking. Right? They were seeing principles that aligned with what they were hearing when they would go to church, and there was a lot of sermons from that era that helped them understand the way in which someone like Locke or that period of the Enlightenment might be used in a way that is actually good for human freedom and human flourishing. And the Catholics who were going to Jesuit schools, because it was illegal to have Catholic schools in America, so they'd go to Europe, and there were Jesuit schools that they would go to. They're reading people like Bellarmine and Suarez, who predate Locke, but I think the Founder's reading of Locke is kind of in sync with what Suarez and Bellarmine were writing about. In fact, I think maybe, we know Locke was reading those people too. He's not citing them because they're Catholic, but there is some resonance there.
Yep, especially the School of Salamanca, the economic political thought that comes out of it.
Right.
So, and like you rightly mentioned, many Catholics will see that, the Founders read Locke, and so knee-jerk reaction, hate Locke. But even then, right, the Founders' Locke was an appeal to all those things that they saw were not only good in Locke, but that were compatible with what the Catholic heritage, the Christian heritage, the biblical heritage had handed down.
Right.
But to expand that conversation even more, and this is one thing I like to point out, our founders quoted no book more than the Christian scriptures. And of the books of the Christian scriptures, they quoted no book more than the book of Deuteronomy, which is ostensibly a book completely about theological political thought.
Right.
Which means that they understood that there was a responsibility here and accountability to God, so help them God.
Right, absolutely. They did think a lot about Scripture, including the Old Testament. The initial thought about the seal for the United States was a depiction of Moses crossing the Red Sea, and the way that they were thinking of the Bible and how the Bible helped explain their own situation, right? Escaping from a tyrannical prince. For Moses, that's the Pharaoh. For them, it's George III. But that God was guiding Moses, so too is God guiding the United States.
You rightly pointed out that we are seeing overt criticism of not just the founding, but just some of the constitutional principles of this nation coming from the right. As someone who came into this nation from the outside and having lived in different nations, there's a certain immaturity and myopia about that criticism. I can acknowledge the validity of some of that thought. Here's my problem, though. We've never in human history had a similar governmental constitutional framework that has allowed for so great an ecclesial flourishing as we have here in the United States. I mean, the United States Church is leading, Catholic Church is leading the world in terms of especially lay apostolates and evangelistic resources. My conversion happened in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, because of evangelistic resources from lay apostolates that took place here in the United States.
Yeah, wow.
So clearly, there is an avenue here that is creating for the right kind of flourishing.
Yeah, absolutely. And none of this is to say that America is perfect. There's lots of things that we need to acknowledge are not right in our history. But the church has been flourishing here for a long time, and it really is amazing to see how fast the church started to grow. One thing I like to point out to people, when the Diocese of Baltimore was created, and initially that diocese included the entirety of the United States, which were 13 states at the time, and the territories to the west. It was a huge, huge diocese. But when that was created, that was the first time that the Vatican had established a new see in a non-confessional state since the Reformation, because what they saw happening in America was real potential, right? Real potential for the church. And so they knew they had to care for the Catholics in this area too. And they knew that there would be more Catholics. And so one of the reasons throughout our history that immigrants have come to this country, if they're coming from a Catholic country, they know this is a place where they're going to continue to be able to be Catholic. Mm-hmm. And so we've had Catholic immigrants coming for almost since the beginning, right? Since French immigrants were trying to get here to get away from the French Revolution. Mm-hmm. Right, and of course the Irish and the Germans and the Hungarians Italians, and it's just been part of our heritage.
The Malaysians
too.
I don't know how many Malaysian Catholics you're going to get, but
Yeah, right. But it happens, and people know this is a place where you can continue to observe your faith, to practice your faith. And I think the faith, you could see the universal church here in America because of all those immigrants coming from all over the world who come here. And yet they have the same creed.
Jerome, it really has been a real joy to connect with you. And like I said, kindred spirits, looking forward to future conversations. I've been talking with Dr. Jerome Foss, endowed professor of Catholic thought and culture at St. Vincent College in Latrobe, Pennsylvania, also director of the Center for Catholic Thought and Culture there, director of the St. Vincent Core Curriculum. I mean, he wears a lot of hats, but he's a thinker of not just American political thought, but in light of the Catholic heritage and the biblical revelation. And we've been talking about the 250th, the semi-quincentennial celebration of the independence of our nation. Catholics, we have a tremendous amount not just to be grateful for, but to steward forward. Stay tuned. I'm Marcus Peter.